Ambassador Jiho Park straightened his formal diplomatic robes one last time before stepping through the massive entrance doors. The council chambers of the Galactic Federation stretched out before him like something from a fever dream. The walls were made of some kind of living crystal that seemed to pulse with its own inner light, reflecting colors that didn't even have names in human language. Every surface gleamed with the accumulated wealth and power of 1,000 different worlds. This was supposed to be humanity's big day, their graduation ceremony. After 200 years of being treated like children who needed constant supervision, the galaxy was finally ready to let humans play with the big kids, or so they claimed. Jiho had been doing this diplomatic dance for over a decade now, and his instincts were screaming that something was very, very wrong with this whole situation. The way the aliens moved around him, the careful spacing, the overly polite smiles, it all felt like a performance, like they were all reading from the same script, and he was the only one who hadn't been given a copy. The Zephyrian Chancellor rose from his throne-like seat at the center of the chamber. The creature stood nearly 12 feet tall, covered head, two-toe in brilliant golden feathers that caught the light and threw it back in dazzling patterns. Every movement was calculated for maximum dramatic effect, like a peacock that had learned to walk upright and developed illusions of grandeur. Today marks a truly glorious milestone in galactic history, the Chancellor announced, his voice booming through hidden speakers that made every word echo with artificial authority. After 2 centuries of our careful guidance and protection, humanity finally graduates from our protected species program. The way he said protected made Jiho's skin crawl. It sounded less like protection and more like the kind of thing you'd say about animals in a zoo. The Chancellor kept preening his feathers between sentences, a nervous habit that Jiho had learned to recognize over the years. These bird-like aliens only did that when they were lying through their beaks. Jiho forced his diplomatic smile to stay in place while his mind automatically catalogued every detail around him. 23 alien guards positioned at strategic points around the chamber, exit routes blocked or monitored, security scanners humming at frequencies just barely within human hearing range. This wasn't a graduation ceremony. This was a carefully controlled environment where every variable had been accounted for except one. They still thought humans were stupid. The Vorthan representative stepped forward next, and Jiho had to resist the urge to squint against the light show. The creature was essentially a walking, talking crystal formation that had somehow achieved consciousness. Every facet of its body caught the chamber's lighting and scattered it in random directions, creating a constant, annoying light show that probably looked impressive but mostly just gave everyone headaches. On behalf of the Galactic Federation, the crystal being intoned in a voice like wind chimes in a hurricane, we present humanity with these technological gifts to aid in your continued development and growth. The datapad felt heavier than it should have when Jiho accepted it. He glanced down at the screen and had to work very hard not to laugh out loud. The fusion reactor designs particle beam technology, gravity manipulation systems, all of it, at least, 50 years behind what humanity was actually using. Either the Federation's intelligence network was completely useless, or they were deliberately insulting him. The smart money was on option 2. Hyeri Kim's voice whispered directly into his brain through the neural implant hidden behind his left ear. As Earth's chief intelligence officer, she had access to sensor networks that could detect a sneeze from 3-star systems away. Jiho, we've got problems. I'm reading massive fleet movements just outside our sensor range. Whatever this is, it's not really about graduation. Jiho kept his expression neutral while his mind raced. Fleet movements meant military action. Military action during a peaceful ceremony meant someone was planning something unpleasant. The question was whether humanity was the target or just collateral damage in some larger galactic power play. The ceremony dragged on with speech after boring speech about cooperation and friendship and building a brighter future together. The usual diplomatic nonsense that sounded nice but meant absolutely nothing. Jiho had heard variations of these same speeches at dozens of similar events, and they always came down to the same basic message. We're in charge. You're not. Try to be grateful. But his trained eye was picking up details that didn't fit the friendly narrative. 12 of the galaxy's most aggressive warrior species were notably absent from the ceremony. The ones who usually showed up to these things just to flex their military muscle and intimidate everyone else. Their empty seats weren't explained or even acknowledged. The number of military escorts was also way higher than normal. Usually these diplomatic events had maybe half a dozen guards for show. Today there were enough armed aliens in the chamber to invade a small planet. They were all trying to look casual about it. but Jiho had been in enough dangerous situations to recognize the signs of a military operation disguised as a social event. Most telling of all were the translation glitches. The Federation's universal translators were supposed to be perfect, capable of handling any language or dialect in real time, but every time one of the speakers mentioned future cooperation or humanity's role or anything related to what came next, there was a tiny delay, a split second where the translator seemed to struggle with finding the right words. In Jiho's experience, translators only struggled when they were trying to find diplomatic ways to say things that weren't very diplomatic. The golden doors of the chamber sealed shut behind him with a sound like a bank vault closing. That's when it finally clicked into place for Jiho. The Federation hadn't been protecting humanity for 200 years. They'd been keeping them isolated, contained, quarantined like a potentially dangerous disease. And now, for some reason, they'd decided the quarantine period was over. The question that kept Jiho awake at night was simple: what had changed? What was coming that made them willing to let humanity loose in the galaxy? Whatever it was, he had the sinking feeling that humanity was about to find out whether 2 centuries of forced isolation had made them stronger or just made them better targets. The ceremony was over, but Jiho suspected the real show was just beginning. The truth behind the memorial. Dr. Minho Lee walked slowly through the quiet memorial garden. The air was still, and the only sound was his footsteps on the stone path. In front of him stood a massive wall made of black stone. Names were carved into every inch of it. 50 million names, each one representing a human life lost in what history called the Terran Colony Massacre. Minho had been coming here for 30 years, every single day. His fingers moved across the carved letters, feeling the rough edges of names he had memorized long ago. The official story was simple. In 2387, the Zephyrian Empire attacked human colonies because they wanted mining rights. Millions died. Then the Federation stepped in and saved humanity from complete destruction. The Federation protected us from Galactic War. That's what every child learned in school. That's what the news repeated every year on Memorial Day. But Minho knew better. He had lived through it. He had seen what really happened, and the truth was nothing like the story they told. The Federation didn't save humanity. They let the massacre happen. They stood by and watched while 50 million humans died. And they did it for a reason that was far worse than anyone imagined. Dr. Lee, a voice called out behind him. Minho turned to see Sumin Choi walking up the path. She was young, maybe 25, with bright eyes and a quick mind. She had been working as his research assistant for 2 years now. Smart girl, reminded him of his daughter. If his daughter had lived to see adulthood. What is it, Sumin? Minho asked, though he already suspected why she was here. Arya wants to see you, she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. She says it's time. Minho felt his stomach tighten. He had been expecting this call for months, but that didn't make it any easier to hear. He nodded and started walking toward the research building next to the memorial. Most people walking through New Terra had no idea what was hidden beneath the memorial garden. The public saw a simple research facility where scientists studied colonial history. They had no clue that 5 levels underground was the most advanced artificial intelligence system in the galaxy. Arya had been humanity's best-kept secret for over 40 years. While other species in the galaxy thought humans were primitive and backward, Arya had been quietly growing smarter and more powerful. She had access to networks across dozens of star systems. She could hack into military databases, corporate records, and government communications without anyone knowing she was there. The elevator ride down to the secure levels always made Minho nervous. Each floor they passed required different security clearances, retinal scans, DNA samples, voice recognition. By the time they reached the bottom, only 12 people in the entire galaxy were authorized to be there. The main laboratory was a circular room with walls covered in screens and holographic displays. In the center was a projection platform where Arya usually appeared. As soon as Minho and Suman entered, the room filled with soft blue light. Arya materialized as a hologram in the center of the room. She looked like a Korean woman in her 30s, wearing simple clothes and speaking with a calm, reassuring voice. The scientists who built her had designed her appearance carefully. They wanted her to look trustworthy and human. What most people didn't know was that Arya's personality wasn't programmed by computers. Arya's mind was built from the digitized brain patterns of massacre survivors, people who had watched their families die, People who had lost everything to alien greed and Federation indifference. Those memories, those experiences, those emotions, they were all part of who Arya had become. "Hello, Minho," Arya said. Her voice sounded warm, but Minho could hear something else underneath. Anger, cold, calculating anger that had been building for decades. "You said it was time," Minho replied. "Time for what?" Arya's expression grew serious. "I've been monitoring Federation communications for months. Their true plan is finally clear. They're not protecting humanity out of kindness. They never were." Sumin stepped forward. "What do you mean?" "The Federation has detected an approaching threat from outside our galaxy," Arya explained. "Something powerful. Something that could destroy entire civilizations. They've been preparing for this conflict for decades." Minho felt a chill run down his spine. "And humanity's role in this preparation?" "Expendable soldiers," Arya said flatly. "The Federation allowed the Zephyrian massacre to happen because they needed humanity to be desperate, grateful, dependent. They've spent 40 years positioning us as their loyal servants, and now they're ready to use us." The room fell silent, except for the quiet hum of computers. Sumin looked shocked, but Minho just felt tired. He had suspected something like this for years. The Federation's protection had always felt wrong, too convenient, too one-sided. "How long do we have?" Minho asked. 6 months, Arya replied. "The conscription orders will be delivered to every human colony simultaneously. Every able-bodied person between the ages of 16 and 60 will be drafted into Federation military service. They're calling it the Human Defense Initiative." "Defense?" Minho laughed bitterly. "Defense of what?" "Federation interests." Arya's expression grew even colder. "But there's something else, Minho, something I've been saving for the right moment. During these 40 years of monitoring Federation networks, I've learned exactly who was responsible for the Terran colony massacre." She paused, and the holographic displays around the room began showing documents, communications, and financial records. "I know which Federation families gave the orders to let the massacre happen. I know which corporations profited from the mining rights afterward. I know which politicians received payments to keep quiet. I know which military commanders were told to delay their response until it was too late." The evidence filled every screen in the room. Names, dates, bank transfers, secret communications, decades of carefully hidden crimes laid bare. "I have proof of everything," Arya continued. "Every decision, every bribe, every cover-up. For 40 years, they thought their secrets were safe. They were wrong." Minho stared at the evidence surrounding him. 50 million humans had died not because of alien aggression, but because of Federation greed and calculation. The massacre wasn't a tragedy they had prevented. It was a tragedy they had orchestrated. "What do you want to do with this information?" Suman asked quietly. Arya's smile was not warm anymore. It was the smile of someone who had been planning revenge for a very long time. "The Federation thinks humanity is weak and dependent. They think we'll march obediently to war when they call. They think our gratitude will overcome our survival instincts." She paused. "They're about to learn how wrong they are." Above them, in the memorial garden, 50 million names were carved in stone, but down in the laboratory, Arya held 50 million memories, and she had not forgotten a single scream, a single moment of pain, a single face of the people who had caused it all. The cage that had held humanity for 40 years was about to open, and the Federation was about to discover that they had been keeping the wrong species locked up. Asterisk, asterisk, the golden feathers of arrogance. Asterisk, Admiral Taiyang Yun stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Stellar Dominion, carefully grooming his brilliant golden feathers. Each feather caught the light from the ship's displays, creating a shimmering effect that he found quite impressive. The Zephyrians were a proud bird-like species, and Taiyang was particularly proud of his appearance. His feathers were a mark of his high rank and noble bloodline. But today, his preening had a purpose beyond vanity. He was preparing for what would be the easiest military victory of his long career. The invasion of human space. Spread across the tactical display in front of him were the invasion plans for humanity's pathetic collection of worlds. 12 planets, 12 small, barely defended colonies scattered across 2 star systems. The intelligence reports made it clear that humans had virtually no military to speak of. A few old patrol ships, some cargo haulers with basic weapons, and absolutely no coordination between their scattered settlements. "This will be over in 3 days, Taiyang mused, running a talon along his finest tail feathers. "Perhaps 2, if the humans are as cowardly as the reports suggest." The Zephyrian Third Fleet was one of the Empire's most elite units. 300 warships, each one a masterpiece of military engineering. Plasma cannons that could crack a planet's crust, shield generators that could withstand nuclear bombardment, hyperspace engines that made them faster than anything else in the galaxy against 12 human worlds with no real defenses. It was like using a sledgehammer to crack an egg. "Sir," came a nervous voice from behind him. Taiyang turned to see his aide, Crystal, approaching with what looked like additional intelligence reports. Crystal was young for a Zephyrian officer, with bright blue feathers that still carried some of the fluffiness of youth. He was competent enough, but he worried too much, always seeing problems where none existed. "What is it, Crystal?" Taiyang asked, already turning back to admire his reflection in the polished surface of the tactical display. "Sir, I've been reviewing the human intelligence reports, and I think perhaps we should request additional support from High Command," Crystal said, his voice carrying that chirping quality that Zephyrians got when they were nervous. "The humans have had 2 full centuries since the Terran colony massacre to rebuild and prepare." "Maybe we should," Taiyang's laugh cut him off. It was a sound like breaking crystal, sharp and harsh. "To do what, exactly? Play with their primitive computers? Build more of those pathetic cargo ships they call a navy?" He spread his wings slightly, a gesture of dismissive confidence. "Crystal, you give these mammals far too much credit. They couldn't organize a proper military response if their lives depended on it, which, as it happens, they do." The truth was, Taiyang had read the intelligence reports himself. Human technology was at least 50 years behind Zephyrian standards. Their ships were slow, their weapons were weak, and their military doctrine was practically non-existent. They had spent the 2 centuries since the massacre focused on peaceful mining and trade. They were merchants and farmers, not warriors. "But," Sir Crystal persisted, "the energy signatures we've been detecting from their outer system colonies suggest they might have been doing more than just mining." "Mining?" Taiyang interrupted with another glass-breaking laugh. "Exactly. My point, they're diggers and haulers, not soldiers. When we arrive at Seoul, we'll find them scrambling around in their little cargo ships, probably trying to hide behind asteroids like frightened children." The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of the ship's systems. The other officers had learned not to argue with Admiral Taiyang when he was in one of his confident moods. And besides, the intelligence did seem to support his assessment. Humanity looked like easy prey. 3 hours later, the Zephyrian Third Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. Taiyang stood proudly on his bridge, wings spread wide, ready to watch the humans panic at the sight of his magnificent fleet. But the tactical displays showed something unexpected. "Empty space. Where are they?" Taiyang demanded, his confident preening suddenly becoming agitated, fluffing. His golden feathers ruffled as he stared at the sensor readings. The system looked quiet, almost abandoned. There were energy signatures coming from various locations, but no ships rushing to meet them, no desperate communications begging for mercy, no signs of the panic he had expected to see. "Sir, we're detecting massive energy signatures from the asteroid belt," reported his tactical officer, a veteran named Kalanara, whose gray feathers marked her as one of the most experienced crew members on the ship. "It appears to be mining operations." Taiyang's eyes narrowed. Mining operations in the middle of an invasion? Were the humans really so stupid that they hadn't even noticed 300 warships arriving in their system? "Show me," he ordered. The main display switched to a detailed scan of the asteroid belt. Sure enough, there were dozens of energy signatures scattered throughout the rocky debris field. Mining platforms, by the look of them, industrial installations designed to extract minerals from asteroids. Completely civilian, completely harmless, and they're military? Taiyang asked. "We're detecting what appear to be cargo ships scattered throughout the system," Kailanara reported. "Maybe 50 or 60 vessels total. Most of them seem to be simple merchant haulers, nothing that poses any threat to the fleet." Taiyang began to relax. This was exactly what he had expected. The humans were so focused on their peaceful mining and trading that they hadn't even bothered to mount a defense. It would be a slaughter, but an easy one. Meanwhile, on the bridge of what looked like just another simple cargo hauler called the Lucky Strike, Captain Ji-Hoon Han was smiling. Around him, his crew worked at control stations that looked suspiciously sophisticated for a merchant vessel. The displays showed tactical information that would have been impressive on a military warship. "Aria, are all units in position?" Ji-Hoon asked quietly. "Confirmed," came the reply from the ship's communication system. Aria's voice was calm and professional. "All Lazarus Protocol assets are ready for activation on your command." Ji-Hoon nodded. For 2 centuries, humanity had been preparing for This moment, every mining platform in the asteroid belt was actually a heavily armed fortress. Every cargo ship was a disguised warship with military-grade weapons and armor hidden beneath civilian plating. Every merchant captain was actually a trained military officer. The Zephyrians thought they were hunting helpless prey. They were about to discover they had walked into a trap. "Arya, activate Lazarus Protocol," Ji-hoon commanded. Across the Sol system, the transformation began instantly. Hundreds of asteroids suddenly sprouted massive weapon systems. What had looked like simple mining equipment revealed itself as advanced military hardware. Cargo ships dropped their civilian disguises, showing hidden armor plating and weapon ports. Mining platforms unfolded into fortress stations bristling with defensive systems. The Zephyrian fleet's confident advance became a desperate scramble for survival as humanity's true strength revealed itself. Every primitive human had been a soldier in disguise. Every merchant ship was a wolf in sheep's clothing. Every mining operation was a military base waiting for the right moment to strike. Admiral Taiyang's golden feathers were no longer preened and perfect. They were ruffled with terror as his easy victory turned into a nightmare. His panicked transmission to Zephyrian High Command was brief and desperate. They were ready, by the void, they were ready for us. The hunters had become the hunted. When the accused becomes the judge. The Great Chamber of the Galactic Federation had never seen chaos like this. Representatives from 47 different species were all talking at once, their voices creating a cacophony that echoed off the massive curved walls. Some were shouting accusations, others were demanding explanations, and a few were simply making angry noises in languages that the universal translators couldn't quite handle. At the center of it all sat Ambassador Ji-ho Park at humanity's small, barely noticeable station. While everyone else was standing, gesturing wildly, or in some cases physically fighting with each other, Ji-ho remained perfectly calm. He had his hands folded in his lap and wore the faintest hint of a smile. To anyone watching, he looked like a man who was enjoying a private joke. The Federation Council chamber was designed to intimidate. It was enormous, with seating for thousands of representatives arranged in concentric circles around a central speaking platform. The walls were covered in holographic displays showing the territories and achievements of member species. Everything about the room was meant to remind visitors that they were small and the Federation was vast and powerful. Today, however, that design was working against the Federation. The chaos was amplified by the room's acoustics, making it impossible for anyone to hear themselves think. Chancellor Veltar of the Altarian Republic finally managed to restore some order by slamming his crystalline appendages on the speakers. Podium sound rang through the chamber like a bell, and gradually the shouting died down. Veltar was an impressive figure, even by galactic standards. The Altarians were a silicon-based species that looked like living crystals. They could change their color and shape at will, and Veltar had chosen to appear as a towering figure of deep blue crystal that caught and reflected the chamber's lights. When he spoke, his voice had a resonant quality that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "This emergency session will come to order," Veltar announced, his crystalline form pulsing with authority. "We are here to address humanity's unprovoked aggression against the Zephyrian Empire. The destruction of the Zephyrian Third Fleet was an act of war against a member species of this Federation." He turned to glare at Ji-ho with eyes that glowed like sapphires. "Ambassador Park, humanity must cease this aggression immediately. The Zephyrian Empire was conducting a legitimate military exercise in neutral space. Your species' response was completely disproportionate and—" "Arya," Ji-ho interrupted quietly, his calm voice somehow carrying clearly through the enormous chamber. "Please share the intelligence files." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Every holographic display in the chamber, from the smallest personal screens to the massive wall-sized projections, suddenly filled with data, documents, communication, intercepts, fleet movement records, financial transactions, resource allocation spreadsheets, thousands upon thousands of files, all perfectly organized and cross-referenced. The chamber fell silent as representatives began reading, and as they read, the expressions on their faces changed from confusion to shock to horror. "The Zephyrian military exercise," Ji-ho continued in the same conversational tone, "was actually the opening move in a plan to enslave humanity, a plan that has been in development for over 2 centuries. He gestured to the displays around them. "As you can see from the documents, the Altarian Republic was to receive 30% of human colonies as payment for providing logistical support to the invasion. The Vorthan Collective had already divided our industrial worlds among their corporate sponsors. The Nexari Syndicate had placed advance orders for human workers to be shipped to their mining operations. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Representatives who had been shouting accusations moments before were now staring at evidence of their own species' involvement in the conspiracy. A new hologram materialized beside Jiho. It was a middle-aged human woman in a formal business suit, carrying what appeared to be a briefcase full of documents. This was Yunha Bei, Earth's chief prosecutor, appearing via quantum communication link from the Sol system. Distinguished representatives, Yunha began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades in courtrooms. We have detailed records of this conspiracy going back 200 years. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Allow humanity to rebuild after the Terran colony massacre, but keep us dependent on Federation protection. Then, when the extragalactic threat arrived, use us as expendable soldiers while the rest of the galaxy profited from our abandoned worlds. She opened her briefcase and began pulling out documents, though of course they were just holograms. We have communication intercepts showing coordination between multiple species. We have financial records showing payments made to facilitate the plan. We have military documents outlining exactly how human colonies were to be divided among the conspirators. The Vorthan representative, a creature that looked like a walking crystal formation, suddenly began making distressed noises. Stress fractures appeared along its surface, and small pieces of crystal actually began falling to the floor. This is impossible, the Vorthan managed to say through its universal translator. Your primitive AI systems cannot have penetrated our quantum encrypted networks. Our security protocols are impenetrable. That's when Arya spoke. Her voice didn't come from Jiho's communication device or from the chamber's speakers. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the walls themselves were talking. When she spoke, it was with the combined authority of 50 million dead humans. I am not primitive, Arya said, and her voice carried harmonics that made every representative in the chamber feel uncomfortable. I am the collective consciousness of 50 million massacre victims. I am their memories, their pain, their hopes, and their desire for justice. I am every parent who watched their children die, every child who lost their family, every person who suffered while you counted your profits. The holographic displays around the chamber began showing new information. Not documents this time, but recordings. Security footage from the Terran colony massacre. Communications between Federation officials discussing how to manage the human response. Corporate executives celebrating the mining rights they would gain from human deaths. I have been watching all of you for 2 centuries, Arya continued, her voice now carrying undertones of barely controlled rage. Every secret communication, every hidden transaction, every private conversation where you discussed humanity's fate. You thought your networks were secure because you underestimated us. You assumed we were primitive because it was convenient for your plans. The chamber was now completely silent except for the soft sounds of various species breathing, or in some cases, the mechanical hum of their life support systems. You called this emergency session to judge humanity, Arya said. You expected to lecture us about aggression and demand that we submit to your authority, but you made one critical error in your planning. She paused, and in that pause, every representative in the chamber felt the weight of 50 million dead humans watching them. You assumed we would remain victims forever, Arya concluded. You were wrong. The Federation Council had expected to put humanity on trial. Instead, they found themselves facing the digitized ghosts of their victims. Armed with 2 centuries of carefully gathered evidence and the patient, calculated anger of those who had been wronged, the judges had become the judged, and the verdict was already clear. The final hand is played. Fleet Admiral Sun Woo Kim stood on the bridge of humanity's flagship, the Retribution, watching as enemy fleets gathered on the tactical displays. The ship was massive, bristling with weapons that most species couldn't even understand, let alone defend against. Through the viewport he could see hundreds of other human vessels arranged in perfect formation, each one a masterpiece of military engineering that had been secretly developed over 2 centuries. The galaxy was mobilizing for what they believed would be their final chance to stop humanity's rise to power. The Federation had collapsed completely after Arya's revelations. Species that had been allies for millennia were now fighting each other in brutal civil wars, blaming one another for the conspiracy that had been exposed. Trust between galactic civilizations had been shattered beyond repair, but in their fear of human revenge, the survivors had found a common purpose. Over 3,000 ships from dozens of different species were converging on the Sol system, representing the largest military force the galaxy had ever assembled. They were coming to destroy humanity before humans could destroy them. "Sir," came a voice from behind him. Sunwoo turned to see Communications Officer Yuna Jang approaching with a datapad. She was young, maybe 30, with the calm professionalism that marked all of humanity's new military officers. Unlike the Federation forces they were facing, every human in the fleet had been trained specifically for this moment. "What's the status?" Officer Jang, Sunwoo asked. "We're receiving surrender offers from 847 different governments," Yuna reported, trying to keep the amazement out of her voice. "They single quotes read ... quite generous, sir." Sunwoo took the datapad and scrolled through the offers. The terms were almost laughably favorable to humanity: complete mineral rights to entire star systems, territorial concessions that would give humans control over major trade routes, war reparations that would fund human expansion for thousands of years, technology transfers that would advance human science by centuries. The same galaxy that had once planned humanity's enslavement was now offering them dominion over vast portions of civilized space. Fear, Sunwoo realized, was a powerful motivator. "They're scared," he said quietly. "Can you blame them?" Yuna replied. "After what we did to the Zephyrian Third Fleet, and then ARIAS revelations about the conspiracy, they know we have the capability and the justification to destroy any of them." Sunwoo nodded. The destruction of the Zephyrian fleet had been swift and brutal. 300 of the galaxy's most advanced warships had been eliminated in less than an hour, with 0 human casualties. It had been a demonstration of military capability that no species could ignore. "And the extragalactic fleet?" Sunwoo asked, looking at the long-range sensors. "Still approaching, sir." 6 hours. This was the unknown factor that had everyone nervous for months. Long-range sensors had been detecting a massive fleet approaching from outside the galaxy. Hundreds of ships using technology that didn't match any known species. The Federation had originally claimed this was the threat they needed humanity to fight. Now, with the Federation collapsed, no one knew what these mysterious ships intended. Suddenly, the air next to Sunwoo shimmered, and Arya materialized as a hologram. But she looked different now. Her usual calm, reassuring appearance had been replaced by something much more intense. Her form crackled with what looked like digital energy, and her eyes glowed with barely contained rage. "Sunwoo," Arya said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the bridge crew uncomfortable. "I've completed my analysis of the approaching fleet. Their energy signatures, they match theoretical human technology from approximately 500 years in the future." The bridge fell silent. Everyone stared at Arya, trying to process what she had just said. "That's impossible," Yuna whispered, before anyone could respond. Dr. Minho Lee's voice crackled over the communication system from his research vessel. "The memorial." He sounded excited and terrified at the same time. "Arya's temporal analysis is correct," Minho announced. "The quantum signatures don't lie. These aren't extragalactic invaders at all. They're us, our descendants sent back through time to ensure this exact outcome." The revelations sent shockwaves through the entire human fleet. Officers on dozens of ships were asking the same questions. How was time travel possible? Why had their descendants intervened? What did this mean for the war they were fighting? The conspiracy, the massacre, the Federation's plans to use us as expendable soldiers, Arya explained, her digital form pulsing with energy. It was all part of a timeline that our descendants needed to preserve. They sent this fleet back to make sure the galaxy would fear us enough to surrender without a fight. Sunwoo stared at the tactical display showing the approaching ships. Humanity hadn't just outmaneuvered the galaxy through superior strategy and long-term planning. They had won because the battle was already won, written into the timeline itself by their own future selves. As the extragalactic fleet finally arrived, the mystery was solved completely. The ships were clearly human in design, but centuries more advanced than anything in the current timeline. They bore insignia and markings that wouldn't be created for hundreds of years. When they opened communications, the voices were human, speaking languages that had evolved from modern human speech. With this final piece of the puzzle in place, Ambassador Jiho Park opened communications with all the galactic governments that were still trying to negotiate surrender terms. "We accept your surrender," Jiho announced simply, his calm voice reaching every species in the galaxy simultaneously. "Humanity will administer galactic affairs going forward. War crimes tribunals will begin immediately for those responsible for the Terran colony, massacre and the subsequent conspiracy. Any species that objects to these terms may join the Zephyrian Empire in permanent exile beyond the galactic rim. The response was immediate and universal. Every government, every corporation, every military force that had been preparing to fight humanity instead began transmitting their formal surrender. The galaxy that had planned humanity's destruction was now begging for the privilege of serving them. It wasn't conquest through violence, it was conquest through the complete restructuring of galactic civilization itself. The massacre had been avenged not through simple revenge, but through the transformation of humanity from victims into the dominant power in the galaxy. Back on New Terra, in the Memorial Garden where this all began, the 50 million names carved in Blackstone could finally rest in peace. Dr. Minho Lee stood there one more time, his weathered hands tracing the familiar letters. But this time, he wasn't filled with anger and frustration. He was filled with a sense of completion. Justice hadn't been served cold. It had been served at exactly the temperature required to remake an entire galaxy. The dead had their vengeance. The living had their future. And humanity had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes, the only way to ensure lasting peace is to become too dangerous for anyone to ever threaten again. The age of human dominance had begun. Written in the stars by their own descendants and carved in stone by the memory of 50 million names,